Hello, my name is Mike Midden, and I am the Director of Product Management for Ag Experiences at the IAB Tech Lab. That encompasses the digital video, CTV, and podcast technical working groups, and the various standards that are developed within those working groups. Today, I'm going to be covering some of the audio-related work that the Tech Lab has produced over the last couple of years. Primary focus will be on podcast technical working group measurement guidelines and the compliance program that revolved around that. And I'll touch on the merging of DAST into VAST, as well as new added support for audibility in open measurement. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. First up is a little history on the Podcast Technical Working Group and how the guidelines were developed. Before the proliferation of today's high-speed mobile networks, the large size of a podcast file required it to be directly downloaded via RSS feed to a listener's device. This legacy consumption method of downloading podcasts is still popular today, which drives many of the challenges faced when it comes to the level of data granularity that digital media buyers desire. Because the medium, distribution, and platforms used to collect and listen to podcasts are built around the habit of downloading the file, tracking content in this time-shifted medium involves filtering server logs to produce meaningful data for measurement. Podcast technical teams analyze server logs differently, producing results that have varied across the industry. The lack of client-side measurement and variety seen in analyzing server logs drove the need for a commonly agreed-upon set of metrics within the industry. Hence, the Tech Lab's Podcast Technical Working Group was formed. This group is composed of companies who publish, sell, host, and measure podcasts. And the goal of the working group has been to provide clarity in the marketplace by developing a common language around measurement. In 2016, the working group developed the first version of the podcast measurement guidelines, with a focus on service-side measurement to define standard metrics for podcast content and ads. The document provided guidance on technical details, such as request filtering, in order to reduce the discrepancies seen across podcast publishers and tech vendors. After that initial release, it became clear that there were also a desire for consistent measurement of audiences. So the working group continued its work expanding the guidelines in 2017 to provide more specific best practices for measuring podcast listeners and downloads with the Podcast Measurement Guidelines 2.0. The new guidelines provided a recommended process for generating audience and download metrics with details on filtering for uniqueness, eliminating preload requests, eliminating potential bots, and more best practices. Relying on server-side measurement meant addressing a number of unique challenges. Analysis is applied to server logs and not necessarily in real time. Understanding precisely when a play has occurred is difficult because the medium is based on complete or partial file downloads. With a general lack of cookies or identifiers for advertising, targeting, frequency capping, and rotation can be challenging. Not to mention this myriad of other complexities that can make measurement particularly troublesome. What's in the guidelines? The core metrics identified within the guidelines are focused on content download, audience, and ad delivery. A download describes a unique file request that was downloaded, which includes complete file downloads as well as partial file downloads. The listener metric corresponds to data that represents a single user who downloads content. Listeners may be represented by a combination of IP address and user agent. The ad delivered metric is determined by server logs that show either all bytes of the ad file were sent or the bytes representing the portion of the podcast file which contains the ad file was downloaded. For example, if an ad was included within the first 25% of a podcast and at least 25% of that podcast file was downloaded, then the ad can be counted as delivered. For dynamic ad insertion, 100% of the ad content must be downloaded before it can be counted as delivered. The client confirmed ad play counts an ad that was able to prompt a tracking beacon from the client when the file was played. Though, as mentioned previously, the majority of platforms lack the technology needed for client-side counting. The guidelines also outline best practices in applying a process for filtering requests, file threshold levels, identifying unique downloads and listeners, generating metrics, and then employing an ongoing process of self-auditing to ensure consistency and reliability. As the industry has continued to evolve over the last couple of years, there's been a need to further clarify and add even more detail to subsections of the measurement guidelines. Recently, the podcast working group reconvened to put together the latest updates to the guidelines with a pending release date likely in the next couple of weeks here. The newest version of the guidelines will include added guidance for user agent structure as seen here, recommendations for IPv6 IP addresses, and a number of additional podcast player recommendations, also seen here. Additionally, the working group has issued guidance for filtering Apple Watch OS user agents due to erroneous automatic downloads that should not be counted. The ultimate goal is to provide further consistency in the adoption of the standards across the industry. In 2018, the Tech Lab rolled out a podcast measurement compliance program. The program aims to ensure adherence to the guidelines using a common set of metrics defined in the document. Companies that successfully complete the certification process receive the IAB Tech Lab seal of approval and are listed as compliant on the IAB Tech Lab website. To gain certification, organizations must go through a 4-step process in which the IAB Tech Lab audits data samples, validates data queries, evaluates business processes, and performs annual validations. To date, the compliance program has been a resounding success with more than 15 major podcasting publishers, platforms, and ad tech companies that have completed the process and received certification. Future work will continue to focus on broadening adoption of the podcast measurement guidelines and promoting the benefits of completing the Tech Lab certification program. Additionally, the working group plans to begin exploring potential guidelines for client-side measurement for the platforms that are capable and improve support for IPv6 based measurements. Now let's talk about some other initiatives that are not necessarily podcast related. That includes the merging of DAST into BAST and the added audibility support for Open Measurement 1.3. DAST was originally spun out of VAST 3 in the interest of getting a standard to market in a timely fashion. Prior to VAST 4.1, a notable amount of digital audio demand had already been using VAST, so the DAST spec was deprecated with all the features being merged into VAST 4 when that was developed. To fully bring audio support into VAST, the ad type attribute was introduced to differentiate between video, audio, and hybrid ad types. The expires property was ported over to VAST, thus allowing a media player to know whether the ad server expected any timeout, after which a prefetched ad should be thrown out rather than played. And clarification was added where audio use cases varied from video. For example, viewable impression does not apply to audio. IAB's Open Measurement project was initiated to develop a scalable solution that minimizes code used to provide data to measurement providers. The IAB Open Measurement SDK offers common code and libraries for facilitating third-party access to measurement data. Sites and apps that integrate the OM SDK can send measurement signals to the Open Measurement API. Measurement providers can place tags that collect these signals. Open Measurement 1.3 introduced support for audio ads with a new creative type and rules to support audio measurement, including an impression event for audibility. This equates to 2 continuous seconds of media playback with non-zero volume. Creatives using MRC audio methodology may be used in HTML, JavaScript, and native ad sessions. In the future, it's possible that Open Measurement could be leveraged for companies that are able to execute client-side podcast measurement. And I believe that is all of the current Tech Lab audio initiatives that I have to cover today. If you have questions about any of these standards or the Tech Lab compliance programs, please feel free to email me at mike@iabtechlab.com. But other than that, thank you and enjoy the rest of the audio day presentations.